And oh, by the way, ideas are addictive. Human beings we love it. We love it. I'm going to let's you and I jam down on how we can solve HR. We're going to come up with a ton of ideas, and we're going to love what we do. Right?
It's going to feel good. It's going to really feel good.
So good. So good.
This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast where we talk to HR innovators about all things people leadership. If you're looking for places to find about new ways to think about the world of work, this is the podcast for you. Please subscribe from your favorite podcast listening platform today and leave us a review. Rebel on, HR Rebels. Welcome, Rebel HR listeners. Thank you for joining us for another week. This one is going to be fun. With us today, we have Andy Binns. He is co-founder of Change Logic, a Boston-based strategic advisory firm. He works with CEOs, boards, senior teams, and tries to help navigate all of the complexities of change. His goal is to help organizations liberate their potential to excite the world with innovation. He has a guidebook called The Corporate Explorer that helps with practices that enable managers to go from idea into action and demonstrates how success is not only possible but may offer entrenched companies better odds than venture capital-backed startups. Thanks for joining us, Andy.
Hi there, Kyle. Very nice to be with you. Thank you for inviting me on your show.
Well, extremely excited, and it's one of those things that this topic for me just spoke to me. And when I got the request to speak with you, and I saw some of the work you were doing, I said yes, we need to talk on the podcast. So appreciate you joining us today. And we are going to start by talking about change. So what got you interested in helping organizations understand how to innovate?
Well, I think what got me really interested in this was I really am a bad employee. Right? I just hate being inside organizations at some level. And so, I think that I wrestle with that issue, and the one place that things seemed to click for me was when I was with IBM. This was 20 years ago, so that means I'd already had 10, 15 years of being a bad employee before I got to this point, and I got assigned to work with IBM. Had these emerging business opportunities. And these were like new businesses. The idea was to create from the assets the company had some new places that it could explore, right? And I was like, okay, I've read stuff about innovation. I had done some stuff in my previous consulting career around innovation, but this was the moment at which my imagination fired, because I saw a place where the rebels, to use your term, could actually live in an organization. That there is a role for those who want to push the boundaries and to take organizations in a different way. And I just thought it was a neat combination of innovation in large organizations.
I love that. And what's really interesting about that, first of all, I love that you're like, yeah, I'm just not a good employee. But I might, flip that a little bit and say, maybe you're not a good employee in an organization that doesn't let you be creative and innovative. Is that fair?
Well, so that may be, but the interesting thing that that's embedded in your question about let you be, right?
Yeah.
Is that it's the organization's job to enable us. And I don't think that's very often the recipe of success, right? And so that's part of the thinking behind this book, Corporate Explorer, how corporations beat startups at the innovation game, is that when we look at examples of really successful innovation in large corporations, it has at the center a rebel, somebody who is going to seize an opportunity, sees a problem in the world they want to solve, and it's them who bring the energy, to bring the purpose, bring the passion to convert that into a business. And they're very rarely given the opportunity. Most of them take it, right? And that for me is a little bit of the same story. So you've got to take these opportunities. And yes, organizations can enable, and we can talk about how you do that, but I just think that's an important sort of marker for the way I think about organizations and innovation.
I think that's such an interesting point, and I don't know that I've ever really thought about it that way. But you are kind of bursting all of our bubbles in HR, where we think like it's up to us to build the platform for innovation. But what it sounds like to me in what you just described is it's more about us getting the right people empowered to do the work, and then getting out of their way. Am I on the right track there?
I think you are. I mean, I think that there's a little bit more we can say, but the notion is that within most organizations, and after a while, this isn't true, right? They can get to the point where that you have a hard time with this. Most organizations, there are explorers. There are people whose bias is towards how do I create? How do I do new, right? And then there are people who are much more, how do I optimize? How do I bring stability? How do I bring regimentation? And what you need to do is figure out how you set some number of those explorers free, not all of them, because then you just create a zoo, right? But allow some of these people to really drive, give them a license to explore, if you will, and that is what will secure the sort of innovation outcomes that many organizations are looking for, and that that impulse that they have is very similar to an entrepreneur. So some of what they do is different, and some of what they do is very is the same. It's a matter of understanding the difference between the two. There's one other thing, one other bubble I want to burst, Carl, if I may, which I think is important. So, and I'm afraid I'm gonna blame HR for this one, just for that.
We're fair game. Go ahead.
yeah. You asked me on your show. So here is what happened, and I will generalize this point in a sec. I'm in Germany in an unnamed large financial services company, and I'm with the head of global talent, and we're discussing the work we've done with them to think about how to create an innovation unit to explore some opportunities that they see to go after. And this is maybe my third or fourth visit. And I say to her, so, leadership of this unit is really important. What progress have you made? Yes, Andy, we have come to a solution to this. We've decided we'll hire from outside because that way, if we fail, the consequences are less. Right? In other words, it won't do any harm to our talent succession if somebody fails and we have to eject them from the system. Right? Outsiders have a really hard time leading innovation inside corporations because they have no social capital. They have no track record of performance. They don't have any favors they can call on from other people. And so what we find is that ones who are really successful at this have a track record. People know them. And when they fail, because we can get onto this, innovation is often about this notion of rapid failing, learn by testing and so on, that you don't know, is it the person or is it the idea? Did they learn something or is it just because they're not very good? But if they're an old timer, there's somebody who has that track record, then you know to trust them. You say, this is somebody who they are doing something new and we know they've done well in the past, therefore we can trust them. And so part of getting this formula right is actually trusting the people you have already. It's not about always recruiting in the premier entrepreneurial talent, or even entrepreneurs in residence is very much in vogue at the moment. This can get you some part of the way, and it's not irrelevant. It's part of the formula. But you've got the corporate explorers are often high social capital, been in the company a while, but just exploratory, build relationships, know how to get things done. And the job is, how do you set them free?
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And you know, this is being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, you know, the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
That's really interesting, and it does go counter to what so many organizations do, right? It's we need new ideas, or we need to come up with a new go-to-market strategy, or whatever the innovation need is, and it's like the immediate default choice is, well, we better go hire from the outside because we probably don't have that person inside the organization. That's the assumption, right? Like that's like the base case assumption, but what you just described, it's really interesting. I'm reflecting on innovation in the HR space, which is obviously one of my favorite things to do.
Sure.
But a great example in my current organization, I have been here for just about 4 years now. I didn't really start making any traction until about 2.5 years in. And a lot of that had to do with exactly what you described. I didn't necessarily have any social capital. I was an unproven resource. People were like, I don't know if I want to give this guy any head count or invest, because I don't know if the direction that we're going here is worth it. Right. It's like there was like that. And so I didn't have many resources. And fortunately now we're making progress, but it's slow.
Yeah.
It takes a long time. But it's a really interesting point.
And I've seen that in HR as well. One of my clients has had a succession of HR leaders. They're about to get another one. And unfortunately, the initial reaction to the person coming in will likely be, well, is it worth me spending my time, right, with this person? Because, the last two didn't last either. And it's the same phenomenon. Yeah. and we just have to respect social networks, even in, modestly sized organizations, right? Maybe especially in modestly sized organizations, because they look and often are very, friendly and affiliative, but that doesn't, people may like you, but that doesn't mean that they're going to help you or that they're willing to put what they have now at risk. That's the challenge.
Absolutely. So I think it's, I think one of the really interesting points you made is we think about, things like org design and talent selection and where, where's the right seat on the bus for this person was the point that you made about, that balance, like the optimizers and the explorers. And, if you have too many explorers, and it is a zoo, right? It's like a bunch of monkeys swinging from tree to tree, and you're like, wait a minute, where's the entrance to the zoo again? Like, how do we get out of it? And so as you were writing this guidebook and kind of doing your research and just in your your vast experience with organizations, what tactics have you seen that work as it relates to how do I structure an organization to empower the right people and optimize the right roles?
Good. Yeah. So first we think about innovation as being about 3 disciplines, right? Ideation, incubation, and scaling. And they're each, they're obviously related and in real life, they're not quite as separate as that makes it sound. You're often working on scaling even as you're doing ideation, but for the purposes of understanding, think about them as 3 separate disciplines. And ideation is about understanding unsolved customer problems. What are the jobs that they want to do, that if you were to solve for them, you could develop strong customer loyalty and attraction. Incubation is about experimenting, using data to tell you which ideas to invest in, and avoiding the trap of investing ahead of your learning. So it's one of those great big corporate things. Let's just spend money on it, right? Rather than let's move slowly, incrementally, test and learn. And then scaling is about converting a successful experiment into revenue. And it's a place where most corporations, or startups for that matter, really struggle. Right? Corporations have particular struggles, which is unfortunate because they have most of the assets to do the scaling, but we can talk about that. One of the things that, so if you've got that sense of ideate, incubate, scale, you're going to treat each of these differently. Right? Ideate is about engaging many people. Right? It's inside the company, outside the company. Deep customer insight. It's an opportunity to turn the company outside so that you derive as much outside in innovation, not inside out. It's not a matter of what you know, what technologies, processes, products you have. It's a matter of what problems you solve. So that's a big piece of why ideation. I think also why CEOs often bring us back to ideation, because they see that opportunity to connect us more with customers. Mm-hmm. So it's okay to make that a mass involvement opportunity in a company. But you've got to select. Not everything you decide on is something that you're going to progress. So at some point, you've got to say, okay, there's a down select to a set of opportunities that you're going to then incubate. Right? Now, in the book, we talk more about how do you set up ideation so that that's easier. And we talk about, even in ideation, narrowing around areas that have the most opportunity and things like that. But at some point, you're going to make a hard decision. And then you incubate. And at this point, you start to think about, well, we're ready to invest. So I'm going to take some of Kyle's time and I'm going to focus him on this innovation. Right? So you start to, we often set up a sort of a sprint team, like an agile process. And for the first 90 days, we've got people sequestered to a team for maybe half of their time to do this. And they're going to go through that first level of validation of the business. And then after that first 90 days, you've got to decide, are you going to pony up the investment to put people on 100%? And at that point, you're creating a venture that you're going to separate away from the core business, right? You've got to separate an explore unit from the core business. It doesn't have to be often a different building. Some people do put it in a different building or a different city. But even if it's just on a different floor, or if there's a corner of the building that you can give it to, because often when you're exploring into new areas, it needs to work in a different way, have a different culture, different working practices, because you might be addressing a different customer set or business model or whatever. And then the scaling story, you're definitely into. This is a separate organization with its own routines and so on. And so that's sort of, it changes as the innovation matures, essentially. Is that getting at what you're thinking of?
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I think just the, kind of the systematic way to how innovation works. It's interesting because a lot of times we hear, you hear these stories, right? Like the light bulb moments, and somebody was they were doing something, at 3M and stumbled across Scotch tape. Yep. Right. And it was because someone was trying to do some other random project that absolutely didn't work, but they stumbled into it. And you hear about these, but I mean, so often we're almost like paralyzed, like, okay, well, how do I actually make that happen in my organization? Right. Like how do we figure out Scotch tape on accident?
and Kyle, I think this may be where you're going. My reaction is we're solving the wrong problem. Right? That we're solving the how do I get lots of ideas problem. And oh, by the way, ideas are addictive. Human beings we love it. We love it. I'm going to let's you and I jam down on how we can solve HR. We're going to come up with a ton of ideas and we're going to love what we do. Right?
It's going to feel good. It's going to really feel good.
So good. But the problem is all about incubation and scaling. And it's not about creativity. I've got nothing against creativity. I've got nothing about generating lots of ideas. But really, we're focused in the wrong place. And this is one of the challenges that corporations get into. So that's why we end up with innovation schemes that just have T-shirts or mugs or big, large-scale events or jamborees of ideas, rather than doing that committed stuff of actually innovating. And the energy can't come from the organization alone. It's got to come from these corporate explorers. That's why they're so important, because that is what works externally. Venture capitalists rely on great entrepreneurs, and they look for serial entrepreneurs, right? People who know how to do this, so that it's in their bones to be an explorer. And that is what you see in corporate explorers as well. It's people who just have that passion, commitment, and also, and this may be different to many entrepreneurs, selflessness. They have to be ready to let other people make them successful, right? And so that means sometimes they're less showy, less it's all about me than we're looking for. Right. So you might have explorers in your organization, you haven't realized it because they don't make as much noise, but actually their capacity to lead and their capacity to identify opportunities may be outstanding. And that's certainly the case that we see in some of these stories in our book.
That's a really interesting point. And I'm reflecting. So my organization, we make equipment, manufacturing equipment, capital, big grinders and things like that, and so we have a lot of engineers, and it's mechanical minded engineers, people who are just trying to figure out, okay, how do I make this work a little bit better? How do I help out a customer? Yes. And some of our best innovators, as you described that, I'm thinking through some of the, like, we're talking like literally industry changing innovators. They're super introverted. They're not showy. They would never take credit for anything, despite all the publications that prove them wrong. But they are churning out that work, and to the point that the industry looks at them as innovators, not just the organization. And
that's it.
And if we don't incubate those folks and allow them the opportunity to scale, anybody in the industry would hire them sight unseen at whatever salary they asked for, which would not be much because they're humble and selfless. And, and it's a really interesting point. A lot of times we think about these flashy, Tesla driving entrepreneurs. Maybe that's not the right profile.
That's right. And many of these innovation programs involve setting up, high profile innovation labs and so on, which I think incidentally have a role. But they're not the same as what you just talked about. I bet none of these people had an innovation lab. I mean, you can tell they did, right?
They had an office with a couple of greasy parts and and an idea, right?
Exactly. Now, sometimes you need to think about, how can I do a dynamic duo? Right. So maybe they're so introverted they can't commercialize, or they're not very customer connected. And actually, if you look at many successful startups, like Yahoo or Google, you actually see a dynamic duo. There's an insider and an outsider. And sometimes you have to look at that kind of combination to get the right sort of corporate explorer effect that you're looking for.
Absolutely. And, I think this is just really kind of interesting. I think the thing that is probably my favorite thing about this conversation is it's turning so many things on their head that we kind of just assumed about innovation. And I think a lot of times we're really reading like some of it's almost like you're reading the headline without reading the article about innovation. And you just assume like, oh, this person's a genius. Nobody else could ever figure this out, and or this organization has this figured out because they hired the smartest people. But there's more to it than that. So as you were putting this guidebook together, I've got to believe that you probably learned quite a bit, and through some of the research process, what were some of the things that actually surprised you as you were putting together this resource?
So one of the things that surprised me in a way is just how many examples of corporate explorers are out there. I just, we started with the premise from our own experience, but then the more we looked, the more we found. And it's interesting. It's kind of like it's because it makes the statement, big company innovates in a new area. It's just not a headline, right? and so we don't see it, and therefore we believe the notion that it doesn't exist, right? And so we were. It was extraordinary how many have actually turned up since we wrote the book. People who reach out to me. One of the ones I've enjoyed most of all is this lady Yoki Matsuoka at Panasonic, and Yoki was on the founding team for Nest, the thermostat now owned by Google. So she's a serial entrepreneur, crazy smart AI person, MIT PhD, and so on. And now she works for Panasonic. She lived in America for many years. So I think since her teenage years. So she's got Japanese and American. But now she set up this thing called Yo Labs, working for Panasonic, an executive officer of the company, creating new ventures for them. Right? And I was like, wow, I had no idea that a big Japanese company was making those kinds of steps. And we've seen it many other places as well. That sort of so it's just the surprise of the amount that's out there.
Yeah, it is funny because I started my career in an organization with 300,000 employees, and everything was a best practice, right? Like, it's like you literally had a guidebook on, what binder in my office goes on what shelf, right? And it was all about control, and there you go. You're a cog in the wheel, don't step outside of it or you get smushed, and so to me, hearing the term large organization and innovation, it's kind of like, it's okay, that's a buzzword, right? It sounds good. You put it on a recruiting flyer, but what is it actually like to work there, right? So at those organizations that have kind of figured this out, do you consider it is it the ability to spot that talent as they're hiring people, or do you consider it more of an ability to develop people that just kind of have this natural inclination? Any insights there?
Good. Yeah, I think we do need to make this identification of talent probably when they've been recruited. I don't know that you bake it into a recruitment process necessarily, but certainly when you've recruited people into the company, are these explorers? How many explorers have you got? And in your talent management system, tag them, be aware of who they are, and there are good tools that will tell you this. So there's one by a firm called Human Insight in the Netherlands that does a great profile actually of a whole team that says, are they exploratory or are they more stability oriented and so on. We talk a lot about that, but it's a good tool. So use something like that. There are others out there that will do something similar. And then I think the other thing you need to do is create these opportunities where they feel they have the license to explore. Right. So in one of our clients, it was a particular project they set up for the Internet of Things. Right. It's a technology firm. They wanted to figure out how they could connect more of their devices to the cloud and use AI to add value-added services. And so they just invited people to join a series of teams to go explore those opportunities. Right. Set up processes like that, but processes that have a clear decision-making approach tied to them, so you don't get into the zoo with ideas that never end. And so you're going to do identification of the explorers, and I'm going to have a license to explore, and I'm going to have some way of picking the winners out of that process and then separating them out. Because as you say, this core business or exploit business operating system will kill them unless they've got a separate explore business system. They need to have some separation. And this is the one of the 2 or 3 biggest things that the organization can do to make this work is create that separation and allow them to operate in a different way, be measured differently, not on the lag outcome results of revenue and customer adoption, but on how many milestones have they hit, what have they learned, how close are they to the sort of indicators that they're being successful. And if you can do that piece right, then you'll be a long way forward to empowering your explorers.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. What's interesting about that is it's the It's the same idea as the large organization who is very structured has, but it's putting that structure into a format that actually fosters the exploratory, success, right? It's that,
Yes.
we talk about KPIs all the time, right? And it's always, quality, delivery, on time, et cetera. And, but when you're talking about innovation, I can't remember the organization now, but I know the organization that actually tracks how much failure do you have. I think it's Mars
Really?
that they actually track.
Good.
You have to have so many failures this month, or you're not successful.
Right. Or you must be sandbagging, right? If
Right.
you never fail,
Trying.
it's because you're too safe. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So really, really fascinating, and I think. From my standpoint, I'm just thinking, geez, I don't know that we do a good enough job with that, right? We're still trying to fit our explorers into the same box as everybody else.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think through is, compensation and incentive programs, and a lot.
Yes.
And so we're trying to figure out right now what is an incentive program that makes sense, that is controllable, but makes sense, but also allows for the the kind of the entrepreneurial flexibility that we need to innovate. So what are your thoughts there on that?
So this is a chapter in our book is around rewards and incentives, and so there's an assumption again that the best way to get corporate explorers in your organization is to figure out how to pay them in a way that's reflects what an entrepreneur might get, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases that's led to companies actually spinning out a company with employees in, right, and then buying them back again and having them operate in the company. All that meant is that suddenly you're sitting next to a millionaire. And that didnand really help employee engagement or
could be morale reducing.
right. And the funny thing is that all of the really successful explorers that we talk about in the book, like Jim Peck at LexisNexis, right, which is an Ohio company, right, and they built this LexisNexis Risk Solutions, or we talk about Christian Kurtish at Unica Insurance in Hungary and now Austria, or Kevin Carlin at Analog Devices, creating this condition-based monitoring business. They didn't have any special incentives. Yes, they benefited personally, and Jim is now on his third gig as a CEO, right? So their careers grew. They've done well, hopefully financially as well. But there was no special incentive scheme to allow them to do that. I think there are some modifications you can make, maybe to put them on longer term incentives rather than anything that's shorter term. But this sort of shadow stock and all these other kinds of ways of giving special incentives, I think could lead to some very unfortunate outcomes. And there's no evidence that they're needed. What's needed is this giving them the license, putting them in a position that they can succeed.
I think that's really interesting. And it reminds me of, all the research around incentives, especially monetary incentives or short-term incentives, that a lot of times we put this goal in place or this metric, and we think, okay, if this metric is achieved, here's the incentive, and that is going to impact human behavior in a positive way because this is a driver. But I can only assume that in your research and in your work with corporate explorers that many of them are probably not as driven by money, but they're more driven by the opportunity to make a change or make an impact or innovate.
That's right. I mean, and one of the corporate explorers that we talk about, he had this idea. So this is Christian Kurtish in Hungary. He had this idea for an entirely new insurance business model. And in the book, we tell the story of how he gets agreement from his managers to go forward with it. But he also took it to venture capitalists. He had 2 firms ready to back him to spin it out as his own firm. And he makes the choice to stay inside, knowing that the financial rewards would be different. But, it's about his tolerance of risk, the sorts of risks he wants to take, right? We think of risk as just being one kind of risk. There's lots of different risks we take, right? And he was willing to take the risk of moving, being unpopular with his colleagues, right? But he wanted to stay within a corporate environment because he liked the assets and the ability to get things done, and he liked the people. He's a part of a system. He actually likes where he is and the people that he's with. He's a part of that community, right? And so it's for him, the finance wasn't important. Wasn't as important. I'm sure he cares about money. But what mattered was that he could do this and reinvent his own firm because he's a part of that firm. He's a part of that community. It matters to him. It's part of his values to be there. It's part of his value. He did this from Hungary, for this is now moving across Europe. And it matters to him to be a proud Hungarian as well. And the same is true of, in Ohio, I'm sure. It's just like what the difference you make to your community, to your city, to your company, actually for some folks is a big motivator in all of this.
Yeah, just take a look at how many people wear like college football teams on their clothes, right? sometimes that drive is as important, or very important.
Yes.
So I do want to talk. I have one more question, and kind of in the same vein, and I think it's about organizations who are changing rapidly and becoming more corporate. So going through a growth journey, and naturally when you get bigger, you start to put in more stuff, more bureaucracy, more controls, more of a corporate mass to make sure that things are checking and out and everything. So how do organizations retain what got them there, that entrepreneurial edge, that innovative spirit? What are the strategies to make sure you don't lose your core purpose there?
This is really important, Carl, and we've consulted to a couple of firms that we would call unicorns, and they've both gone public in the last year through the SPAC route to going public, and it's exactly the story. We've always been entrepreneurial. We're now one of them $1 billion in value, in revenue as well as in value, right? More in value, and there's new things we want to do, but as we started to try to do them, we struggled. We couldn't do the thing, and it comes back down to the founding team, right? So in both of these stories, what we find is that the entrepreneur that started it didn't have a system for replicating what he did, right? And it is both he in these instances, and that their response was to want to continue to control as much as possible on the grounds that they're the smartest people in the room, right? And they structured the organization and its innovation in such a way that everything came back to them. Contrast that with Jeff Bezos, right? Maybe not our poster child and everything.
He does have a spaceship.
He does have a spaceship, goddammit, yeah. Yeah, the Corporate Explorer, how to innovate without the spaceship. That's what I should have called it. But Bezos has a recipe, right? He has everybody gets the right to propose new ideas, and he's got this PR FAQ system, 1-page press release, what the customers get out of my innovation, FAQ, frequently asked questions, my backup as to the kinds of questions you might have about how we're going to get it done. Right? System for how that can get proposed. And if you have an idea that people like, okay, well, I'll give you a 2-pizza team. In other words, only so many people can be fed by 2 pizzas, right? To go work that up into an MVP, and we'll take it into trial and find out. This is the incubate piece that I talked about. And then when he scales, Amazon has all these separate units that operate with some high degree of autonomy, but they're all linked by 2 things. They're linked by APIs, so everything is interoperable, and secondly, by a management system that is consistent, so they can all of their performance is transparent and the comparison to others is transparent. And so this is the difference. do I think I replicate innovation results just by my personality, or do I put in place some minimal system that allows ideas to come up and give them the autonomy without sacrificing the access to the assets of the core business, if you will? So does that make sense? What do you think?
Yeah. That it's a really interesting example, and I'm just reflecting on your kind of your comment that corporate innovators have an advantage over some of these VC firms. And it sounds like to me, it's the systems, it's the structure that can enable the scaling and the incubating, and not just the light bulb ideas.
And the fallacy that many of us sit with is that it's the ideas that matter, right? We all think that like Polaroid and Kodak and Nokia and these other firms, that they got disrupted and kicked out of, and sent into bankruptcy because they didn't see digital technologies coming. They didn't see digital photography, or they didn't see app stores and touch screens and smartphones. It's totally untrue. Right? They all had the technology. They all had the insights. And Polaroid had the world's first megapixel camera in the market in the 90s. The issue is they couldn't execute. It's about how do you use these assets that makes the difference, not whether you have the ideas. And that is the hard part of it. I've portrayed a very positive story, and I've written this book with two professors, and Mike Tushman from the Harvard Business School, Charles O'Reilly from Stanford. And so I've got another story about what it's like to have a Harvard and a Stanford professor marking your work every week.
Sounds a little
intimidating,
threatening. Yeah.
But I've forgotten what I was going to say then. What did I say before then?
Yeah, you were talking about the execution, and then we've had a positive slant on this.
Oh yeah. So Mike Tushman always says, "What are the counterfactuals?" Right. So it's all very well to have these great stories, but there has to be and there are counterfactuals in the book. And the biggest is GE, right, and how it pursued GE Digital, and what killed it was the social network, right? And so a lot of there's a lot of a view that if you have the CEO's support, you must succeed. Well, he had all the support Jeff Immelt, as CEO of GE, could possibly give him, right? The guy stuck his future on this strategy to be a software company, and that. But those weren't the things that killed Bill Rue, the leader of GE Digital. It was the sort of silent killers in the organization, like the system of optimization and so on. So I do need to highlight that this can be tough as well. No doubt.
That sounds like everything in HR. You start with these great intentions, and then oh wow, this is a lot harder than we thought it was going to be. But
and HR has a core explore problem the whole time, because I want to get paid. I don't want to, and if I'm managing, I don't want to end up in prison for some breach of regulation. There is a core business of HR that you cannot screw up, and then there has to be an explore. You have to again see these as separate, and I think this notion of separating the two may be appropriate in HR as well, rather than trying to make everything. I personally hugely dislike the Ulrich model of the HR generalist, because the generalist, it's in that name. I don't think this is. I think it's open to challenge as to whether that really is the role of HR, right? And that because the skills of delivering the repeatable results on pay, conditions, employment law are completely different to I'm going to figure out how to do innovation. I'm going to figure out how to contribute strategic skills. I'm going to figure out how to make hires and refresh our leadership team or board. Right. So I just think that these are two different things as well.
I agree 100%. And maybe this is just, I'm just happy that you said that, because that's how I've structured my department. But it's the, I agree wholeheartedly, and I think it comes down to the research on behavioral competencies and what people are actually good at, and what strengths do they have. The person who is the compliance and payroll and all of the really, really critical stuff that you can't screw up, that the competencies that they have are very different than the competencies that I have, which is strategy and cultural sensitivity and being flexible to change and dealing with dynamic situations and really emotional situations. And it's just, there's a dichotomy. A human can't be all those things. Right. It's just the reality of the situation. Right. So I agree. Now, for all you HR people of one out there, and you got an entire department and you are a true generalist, I feel you. I've been there too. But if at all possible, if you can be aware of that, and as you think about your organization, if there are things that you can structure to allow, for a little bit of a diversion of how you measure success, but depending upon the actual task, that would be my recommendation there. So
no, that's fair. And I should say, it's easy to think about this corporate explorer story as only being about the largest organizations. But I can give you, quite small organizations that have done this as well. Certainly ones below 100 employees. There will be a point at which it's hard because you can't split an individual. I get that. So, there is a point at which it's difficult. But certainly the 20s, 30s and upwards, I can point to organizations with corporate explorers who renew themselves.
Absolutely. Well, this has been just a wonderful conversation. Unfortunately, we were coming to the end of our time together, so I do want to get through the Rebel HR Flash Round questions.
Yes, go for it.
Fascinated to hear these answers. All right, question number 1. What is your favorite people book?
My favorite people book? My favorite people book right now is the one by Reed Hastings around Netflix. That I love the way that he describes, the sort of way in which he, with his HR leader, deliberately constructs the culture at Netflix. But I also love that it starts with a sort of humility of, we didn't get here with a brilliant, I was always going to do this. We realized we were screwing up. We had a problem we had to solve. And if we were going to scale this business, we needed to change. I thought that was a tremendous, really fun book and very insightful because of that humility.
Absolutely. And talk about an innovator, right? I mean, from mailing DVDs to your house to you just push a button on your remote and you can watch whatever you want.
That's right. And they have reinvented themselves several times. And there's a Harvard case that will tell you how they could never make a move from DVDs to streaming. People bet against them at that point.
Oh, I wish I would have bought that stock a while ago.
Yes.
Oh, well. All right. Question number 2. Who should we be listening to?
So I have to say that I don't listen to a lot of business podcasts. So I listen a lot to a gentleman called Mike Duncan, who has done a bunch of podcasts, one of them, The History of Rome. But I'm an addict of his very long running sequence of Revolutions podcasts. And he's gone through the British Revolution, the English Civil War Revolution, the American Revolution. Until I became a citizen, I'd call that the rebellion, but now I recognize it as a revolution.
Yeah, you're not allowed to be a citizen if you call it that. I don't think that's on the test.
That's right. The French Revolution and so on. And what's really interesting is that when you listen to these 10 revolutions, you get a few things. And revolutions happen when people resist change, when they try to stop renewal, right? When they don't explore into the future adequately or learn their way into the future. And so in these stories of history, you get the same stories of what happens to companies that don't renew themselves. And I love the way he presents it. So Mike Duncan is who people should listen to.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Last question. Great conversation today. Just wonderful content. How can our listeners connect with you and get their hands on the Corporate Explorer?
Well, please go to Amazon or your favorite e-commerce vendor and look for Corporate Explorer by Andrew Binns, Mike Tushman, and Charles O'Reilly, thecorporateexplorer.com.
Awesome. Absolutely. It just wonderful conversation today. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing a different perspective from the kind of the conventional wisdom and really kind of stretching our minds here a little bit. So thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Kyle. I enjoyed it enormously. And thanks to all of your listeners. And if people buy the book, read the book, love your feedback.
Perfect. Thanks. All right, that does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.